This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so LifeLock wants to remind you to update your passwords. Using the same password across multiple accounts makes you vulnerable to cybercriminals. For comprehensive identity theft protection, let LifeLock alert you to anything suspicious and fix any issues. Start protecting your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
With the fall election just 5 weeks away, some Portlanders might be having uncomfortable memories of election night unrest from years past. But a lot has changed since the protests of 2020, both for the right and left-wing groups that clash in our city's streets and for the Portland police. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with Oregonian reporter Zane Sparling. He was one of many local journalists covering the George Floyd uprisings 4 years ago. He's here to walk us through who the key players would be in a possible election protest showdown, how the police are preparing, and how their tactics have had to change. But before we jump in with Zane, I just wanted to share that we are kicking off our fall member campaign today. I mean, it is true that our daily podcast and newsletter are completely free for anyone in our community, but that's only really possible with member support. So all week, we're going to be asking you to become a member. If we've ever helped you understand a local issue, hosted a guest you loved, or introduced you to the best of what's happening around town, now's the time you can show your support. And my favorite part of hosting the show is actually investigating topics and questions that we get from you, our listeners. Like this week, we have a conversation breaking down why the East Side has less city infrastructure than inner Portland neighborhoods. And that topic was actually requested by many regular East Side listeners, as you can imagine. But us taking that time to research, find and book the right guest, tape the interview, edit, mix, assemble, just a single episode of that magnitude takes significant resources. So again, joining our member community is the best way to just show us that you appreciate this daily podcast. And with your small monthly contribution, we'll get to stick around for years to come and hopefully help answer many other questions you might have about where we all live. To join our growing CityCast Portland community, visit membership.citycast.fm. That's membershipcitycast.fm and become a member today. All right, on with the show. It's Monday, September 30th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Zane, do you still think it's fair to assume that there will be protests no matter who wins the election like last time?
Well, it's Portland, baby. So my student opinion is, of course, there will always be protests in our city. There will always be free speech events, and there will always be journalists there to lose their minds about it.
Yeah, that's all true. Well, do you think police knows if there are going to be massive protests around the election? I would imagine that there already would be buzz, in whatever circles they congregate in.
So I think that the police, of course, are trying to get ahead of this and are well aware that there's an election coming up, right? And to maybe give you, Claudia, a slightly less facetious answer to your first question, it does depend on the outcome, right? A Trump win is going to send a lot more people into the streets than a Kamala Harris win, which will probably be marked in Portland, where, the Democrats control and there's a wide liberal advantage in voter registrations, right? A Kamala Harris election is going to end with celebrations rather than tears and broken glass. Either way, though, there will be some sort of street activity. And I think what's really interesting about the police response is that they can't arrest you on pre-crime, right? This is the moment where you need to insert a really great clip from a Minority Report where Tom Cruise says something like pre-crime, because they can't do it. They can't do it. If you are the KKK and every week you go out and you do something horrible, and this week you are showing up again, the police cannot arrest you even though they know you are going to go do that horrible thing. It's the same with Antifa, Proud Boys, any sort of group. You have to be arrested based on the conduct that does occur, right? The police cannot arrest a group of protesters because they think sometime in the near future they're going to go break some windows, right?
Right.
They have to wait till after someone's broken a window to arrest them. It's when police do things like kettles, which is when you sort of just arrest everyone in a group, usually they then hope that they won't be sued afterwards because, again, those people haven't necessarily committed a crime. And they often can't charge them with anything. They're basically just keeping them detained for a period of hours, right?
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, totally. But it answered so many questions because I've never seen Minority Report, and now I feel like I know what the movie's about. I'm like, oh, it's about pre-crime. And oh, Tom Cruise is in it. So I feel like I learned a lot just now. So let's talk about the main players here. I'm going to do a lot of sports analogies because Portland did win the Super Bowl of social unrest in 2020. And I do feel like every time there is a protest, if you were just to like put it in a different city, it would be like, oh, what football team won and or lost? You know? So like if we were looking at the teams that clashed in the streets in Portland 4 years ago, specifically the radical left and right extremist groups, how much noise are these two generally making now compared to 2020? Because I personally feel like I haven't heard much.
That's right. I think the sports metaphor is it's a rebuilding year and our rosters are down. We are recruiting from both sides to catch people up to speed who maybe were out sailing across the Atlantic Ocean when the 2020 protest happened. There was a massive social upheaval, right? We had over 1,000 arrests of left-wing protesters, and we also had people who had sort of been from these smaller right-wing cadres. Patriot Prayer was an original going back to like 2016. Joey Gibson, his group spawned and then merged with the Proud Boys, just basically because the Proud Boys had better brand recognition.
It's a catchy name.
I'm not going to comment on that.
I'm just saying it's a catchy name.
The point being, there have been a ton of people who have been kind of taken out of play, right? On the left, most of those 1,000 people who were arrested did not go to jail for a super long time. But they, for someone who has, let's say someone who's a Reed College student, right? If you get booked, right, your name may be distributed on a press release. Someone may decide to tweet out a photo of your mugshot. Those are all real repercussions that could affect someone's decision to participate again in a protest in 2024.
Wait, hold on. So you actually think that the arrests that happened during the previous protests are influencing like what's going to happen?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
to me, I'm just like, I just thought like, yeah, they get arrested and then they're just going to do it all over again. But you're saying that some people are actually deterred.
Well, Claudia, we've talked a lot about people who get arrested and then they're out on the streets 5 minutes later, right?
Exactly.
And I know that is very, very annoying to many people because it doesn't feel like a deterrent, but that is more true when you have dropped out of society, right? If you are someone who doesn't have rent, doesn't have an employer, doesn't have all of these sort of pro-social bonds that can make, a mom who is concerned and texting going, are you all right? Someone is sending me a tweet of you getting, like if you don't have those things, the arrest doesn't bother you as much. If you are, still a functioning member of society, getting arrested, having your mugshot tweeted out, those are things that might make you think twice, right? I mean, it is a factor. And that's also true for the right-wing side. And then I would say some of those really key lieutenants in the right-wing movement, like Tiny Toese, those people are now in prison, right? Not only is that person not participating in 2024, they're friends, and people like Joey Gibson, who beat his charges but has sort of faded away into the woodwork. I mean, I think the reality is that people who remember 2020 are probably thinking twice to some extent about going out and doing things the way we did back then.
Right. I also feel like 2020, aside from it being, this like national response to the George Floyd and the pandemic, so many things. I also feel like in Portland specifically, there had just been so many incidents from people coming out of town and starting stuff. Like you were just mentioning certain Proud Boys, and they had like full on beat people in the streets, just riding around in the truck and just targeting people that looked different. And like, this isn't like something I'm making up. This is something that did occur, which is why they're in jail. It's, it's not, they weren't just like smashing a window or standing and being like, whatever, provocative or saying racist things. It's like, no, they were like beating innocent people who weren't protesting, who were just like outside a bar or whatever, just like the keg was a little bigger here in Portland.
The powder keg and the keg of delicious Riot IPA was really big in 2020, Claudia. You are so right.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, the Portland Police's new protest response team. you're a home DIYer like me, you might have some leftover paint gathering dust in your basement. But I'm happy to share that Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter, reducing waste, and helping you get back some of that much-needed storage space. First, buy the right amount of paint for the job. Paint Care has 6 questions to ask yourself when buying paint that can help ensure you have enough while minimizing waste. Second, you use up what's left. Before you break out the paintbrush and tape, see if you have any leftover paint that can save you a trip to the store. Paint Care's website also offers helpful tips for storing paint properly so it lasts for years. And third, if you still have paint, stain, or varnish left over, Paint Care makes it easy to recycle it with convenient drop-off locations as close as your local hardware store. And you can go learn more at paintcare.org/3simplerules.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so LifeLock wants to remind you to update your passwords. Using the same password across multiple accounts makes you vulnerable to cybercriminals. For comprehensive identity theft protection, let LifeLock alert you to anything suspicious and fix any issues. Start protecting your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Well, 4 years ago, the Portland police voluntarily dissolved their rapid response team, and that was the unit that specifically responded to protests. And they dissolved the team because one of their members was being held accountable for excessive force. They also left a wake of lawsuits against the city because of their tactics. But earlier this year, City Council voted to fund a new protest response team, now called the Public Order Team. Is this basically the same thing? Are these the exact same people? Like, is anything changed?
Has anything changed? Well, we're all a little bit older. We're all a little bit wiser. Again, I don't want to return to rebranding, but this was, whether you call it the Rapid Response Team or the Portland Protest Team or any other alliterative thing you can come up with, it's a team of officers who have, access to a little bit more training. Maybe they're getting a bit of a stipend to give up their nights and weekends from their perspective to respond to these protests. It does have some important administration functions for the police bureau to have a specific group of officers that they're going to call their protest response unit, their crowd control unit. But it's not like after all of those officers resigned en masse back in 21, it's not like we stopped having police officers responding to protest, right? It was an emblematic move. It was a move of distaste and disapproval by the police union, right? Saying we are very upset because one of the officers on the crowd control team had been arrested, right? And that was them telling the DA and their leadership at the police bureau, we don't like this. But those officers continued to go out and respond to protests. They just weren't a part of that administrative unit. So I think this new team is going to have the same function, right? You'll see people gearing up in riot squad armor, right? They're going to have the knee pads and the special helmets. They're going to have the beanbag guns and flashbangs.
Let me put it in a different way.
Sure.
Because of all the issues that the rapid response team was having with its approach to crowd control, the federal and state government both had to come in and explain to the city how the law works. And we were fined. There were just so many things that happened. Could you explain what's changed in the past 4 years with how the Portland police is allowed to respond to protests? Because I'm assuming that has changed because it needed to, and legally it has to change.
Well, so Ted Wheeler did restrict the police bureau's use of CS gas, and we've had some state laws change that are making it, from the police perspective, a lot harder to use that sort of mass tear gas weapon, which of course is really indiscriminate because you just fire it. It covers usually an area of city blocks, and then anyone who happens to be in that area, whether or not they're out on the streets, if they've got a window or an AC vent open, they're going to be tasting that tear gas for a while. And it's not I can tell you from experience, it was not pleasant. So that's changed, right? Police have said that they don't think they can use tear gas as much. Of course, it's been a couple of years and they might have forgotten that that's their position and they might just use it anyways and see what happens in a sort of so sue me attitude.
And they will.
I mean, lawsuits and federal oversight, of course, create a lot of paperwork and often are a well-known drain on the city coffers, right? I don't think that the reality is that police officers in the moment when they're in the field are going to do basically whatever they want to within the guides of their, hopefully of their training. I mean, it's not, I don't see the police bureau as being some magically different agency. I mean, crowd control is not an easy thing for anyone involved. I mean, the whole point of being a protester who wants to break a window is you're usually trying to hide among a bunch of other people who aren't committing any crimes, and then you can, dash out, break the window, and then you kind of use everyone else as cover. So when police charge into those sorts of crowds and push people, the people get hurt, right? People fall to the ground. Those people suffer injuries. They sue. If the police don't charge into that group of people and start pushing them, then presumably the windows breaking continues, and the next morning the mayor has to go on Fox News and explain why the city hasn't burned to the ground. So it's a perfect lose-lose for everyone involved.
Yeah. I mean, aside from their excessive force, they were also targeting people that normally wouldn't be targeted, like reporters, medical staff, just people that weren't actively doing anything, maybe just were like in their way. And you spend a lot of time yourself directly reporting on the 2020 protests. And at that time, you yourself were struck by crowd control munitions fired by the PPB. Like, I feel like I've been a little like cheeky talking about like all these teams, because there are these teams, these very defined forces. But then there's also just the people who have to report on this. There's also the mothers who showed up to make sure that people stopped using tear gas, because they were just like, y'all, this is messed up. There were fathers there. Do you remember like with like leaf blowers? There were, It wasn't just like Antifa and the Proud Boys. Like, it was a big chunk of Portland. And so do you think that these changes, the new police force, the federal government coming down, like, will be adequate to protect people like journalists like yourself, people who are just there to do a job?
Well, Claudia, first off, thank you for digging into the ancient history of Zane's encounters with police. Yeah, I think you're totally right that this was not, and I hope that in my responses it hasn't seemed like I've been trying to characterize this as a homogenous group, right? The Black Lives Matter social protest movement was probably the largest in a numbers sense social movement ever, right? Just in terms of how many people were mobilized across the United States. Portland saw tens of thousands of people out on certain nights. There was a huge amount of what you might refer to as, normie protesters, people who were moms and dads, people who were, horribly transfixed by the video of George Floyd being murdered, right? And of course, we had a lockdown going on, so this was basically the only way you could go outside. So yeah, we had tens of thousands of people coming out. Most of those people did not want to break windows. They wanted to make their voice heard, and they wanted to see real change implemented. The reality is that culturally, right, I think things have shifted a lot since 2020, and that will be a huge factor in how police respond. Obviously, most of the police bureau remembers what went down 4 years ago. I don't think the police want to, go out for 100 nights in a row and, have people tell them how much they suck, right? For night after night. They probably would be happy being home in Clark County, not doing that. So,
because most of the police force doesn't actually live in Multnomah County. That is what Zane was saying, and it is true.
The point being, yeah, there was a ton of people out there who have very different aims and motivations. It's really only a small percentage of people, and kind of the most hardcore amount that, really became, even among Antifa, right? There's lots of people who think police abolition is a good thing. There's a even smaller percentage we should have no form of government outside of anarchism. And the best way to accelerate to that situation is by telling this Starbucks window why I don't like it. So, and the reality is that when police try to prevent the window smashing behavior by, tear gassing all 10,000 people, it made a lot of people upset in those protests. And I hope for everyone's sake that those sorts of situations don't happen again, that the police are using a scalpel to, deal with unlawful activities, but leaving pretty much everyone else alone, right? It's regardless of whether or not people have a permit. I think the First Amendment is our permit when it comes to being outside. If people want to go outside and say, hey, I don't like XYZ, they should go out and do it tonight or on November 5th.
So, Zane, is this a rallying cry? Because this is when Zane slowly turns into the Joker. It's so funny because I feel like journalists, especially come November 5th, we're going to be so tired. We're going to do an all-nighter and then we're going to sleep for a week. And so I think just from that perspective, anyone listening, please don't. Please don't.
I look forward to chugging that 3 a.m. sugar-free Red Bull with you, Claudia. I'm sure we're going to have a very, very normal election season. And what more could happen? There's already been so much.
Oh, Zane, why? We're going to cut that out. No. Those are like famous last words. Well, Zane, thank you for taking the time to go through this possible scenario with me. Hopefully, if anything does happen, it isn't exactly how it was, because nobody needs that right now. We just don't need it.
We don't need it. Claudia, once again, I am the reporter that the city may not want, but that it deserves. It is always a pleasure to be on. That was a Batman joke.
From Joker to Batman, Zane. And just a reminder that our fall campaign is underway. Become a CityCast Portland member and help keep us free to everyone. But there's also some great perks, so go to membership.citycast.fm right now to join. And if you're already a member, thank you. We really could not do this work without you. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.